What if I told you some spirits never left their graves, and tonight they might be watching you? If you love ghost stories, hit subscribe, tap like, and share this video so we can bring you even more terrifying tales. Subscribe, like, share to keep the ghosts coming. It begins, as so many ghost stories do, not with thunder or lightning, not with the clash of heavens or the tremor of earthquakes, but with something small, fragile, and deceptively innocent. A doll, a child's toy, something meant to cradle imagination, to be a companion during the long afternoons of play, to be whispered to in secret languages only children and their cherished toys understand. A doll should be a vessel for joy, but sometimes, in the crooked turns of fate, a doll becomes a vessel for something else, something that feeds not on play but on grief, not on laughter but on cries that never end. In Mexico, a land where the dead are never truly gone, where every November sees families open their doors to welcome their departed back for a night of communion, there exists a story that feels both ancient and immediate. It is the story of Joliet the doll, known by whispers as the cursed child spirit, a porcelain-faced phantom that has haunted one bloodline for over a century. Unlike the ghosts who haunt houses, wandering their corridors like memories bound to stone, Joliet does not haunt a place. She haunts a family. She haunts a womb. She haunts the very act of birth itself. The doll's legend is not a carnival tale to be traded among strangers, nor a tourist attraction with tickets at the door. It is a story folded in whispers, passed down from mother to daughter like a secret too heavy to say aloud in daylight. It is the kind of story one hears when candles are low, when the night presses too close, when someone says, "There is something I must tell you before you inherit what I have carried my whole life." It is the kind of story that changes the shape of destiny. To understand Joliet's curse, one must first step into the cultural soil that nourished it. Mexico is a country carved by paradox. It holds both the cross and the obsidian knife, both Catholic saints and Aztec gods whose names still whisper under the pyramids. Death here is not an end but a presence, a companion. Every village has its graveyard, and every graveyard is alive with color once a year. Children grow up learning that bones are not grotesque but holy, that skulls can smile in sugar form, that candles and marigolds are bridges between the living and the departed. But alongside this sacred familiarity with death runs a vein of fear. There are stories of La Llorona, the weeping woman who drowned her children and now cries along the rivers. There are tales of shadows that follow you at crossroads, whispers in the desert that call you by name. Dolls in particular hold a unique terror. The famous Island of the Dolls, where hundreds of decaying figures hang from trees, reminds everyone that toys can become offerings, that glass eyes can drink in souls. It is into this world that Joliet was born, not as a crafted legend for outsiders, but as a curse hidden inside a family, as private and persistent as a genetic scar. Every curse has an origin, though, like roots beneath the soil, the truth is tangled. Some versions say Joliet was given as a gift by a jealous friend, a present wrapped in kindness but seeded with malice. Others claim she was crafted by a Bruges witch, who infused the doll with sorrow as vengeance against a woman who had wronged her. Still others insist it was no human hand at all, but fate itself, that placed the doll in the family's keeping. The most enduring tale, however, speaks of betrayal. Long ago, in a small town in central Mexico, a young woman whose name has been lost to time fell in love with a man her family did not approve of. Their love was secret, fragile, and doomed. When her lover vanished, either taken by duty or lured away by another, she was left pregnant and alone. The shame of her condition weighed heavy, and though her family scorned her, they allowed her to give birth. She delivered twin children, a boy and a girl, but the boy did not live long. Some say he died of illness, others that he was taken by unseen hands. The grief was unbearable. In her despair, the young mother turned to an old woman in the village for comfort. This woman, known for her remedies and whispers of witchcraft, gave her a doll Joliet. She said it would keep the girl company and hold the memory of the boy, but the gift was poisoned. From that day onward, the curse began. The women of the bloodline would always give birth to two children, a girl who lived and a boy who would die. And always, the doll remained, passed from hand to hand, absorbing the cries of each lost son. Descriptions of Joliet vary, but all agree on one unsettling fact. She is ordinary, almost disappointingly so. Not grotesque, not monstrous, but plain. A doll with delicate features, faded with age. Her porcelain face cracked in tiny veins like spiderwebs of time. Her glass eyes, once bright, now carry the dull sheen of something that has seen too much. Her body, stuffed with cloth, has been patched and stitched across decades. She is not beautiful, not horrifying, she is familiar. And that familiarity is the very root of unease. For when the house is silent and the night deepens, she does not remain silent. The mothers swear they hear it, the cries of infants, muffled but unmistakable, coming not from cradles but from within her hollow form. Sometimes laughter, the high-pitched giggle of toddlers who never grew. Sometimes whispers, like lullabies turned inside out. Words too soft to make out but heavy with sorrow. To see Joliet in daylight is to dismiss her as a relic. To hear her at night is to understand she is something else entirely. The curse has stretched now across 4 known generations. Each time, the story repeats itself like a cruel script, written by unseen hands. A daughter inherits the doll when she becomes a mother. She gives birth to twins. The boy dies. The girl survives. And so it continues. The women, burdened with grief, do not destroy joy. Perhaps they fear what might be unleashed if they try. Perhaps they cling to the doll as the last echo of their lost sons. Whatever the reason, Joliet persists. She is kept hidden but never discarded, guarded but never freed. The current keeper of Joliet, whose identity remains veiled for her own safety, has spoken to researchers in hushed tones. She admits she does not love the doll, but she cannot bring herself to let it go. Inside her, she has said, "I hear them, all of them. My son, my mother's son, my grandmother's son. They are all still here. How can I destroy that?" Her words reveal the paradox at the heart of the curse. Joliet is both the wound and the bomb, both the source of sorrow and the last thread of memory. To lose her would be to lose the children forever. To keep her is to ensure the cycle of grief never ends. Joliet is not like Annabelle, the American doll said to be possessed by demons, nor like Mandy, the Canadian doll with her cracked porcelain face. Joliet is not public. She is not theatrical. She is private, intimate, and relentless. Her curse is not aimed at strangers but at family, not at those who stumble into her path but at those who cannot escape their blood. This makes her haunting uniquely terrifying. She is not an intruder but an inheritance. She does not break into your home. She is handed to you by your own mother, with eyes that say, "I am sorry, but this is yours now." And in this way, Joliet mirrors something profoundly human, the inheritance of trauma. Families pass down not just heirlooms, but wounds, stories of violence, silence, betrayal, grief. Joliet is this truth given supernatural flesh. She is generational sorrow incarnate, grief turned into porcelain and cloth. What is most chilling in every account are the voices. Paranormal investigators who have spoken with the family claim recordings exhibit low, almost inaudible sounds of crying, like a baby restless in sleep. The family insists these voices are not echoes from the living world, but the actual souls of their lost sons. Over the years, the voices have multiplied. What was once one child's cry is now a chorus. At night, the women say, "It sounds like a nursery where no children sleep, filled with laughter and sobs, where the air itself vibrates with absence." It is said that to hold Joliet is to feel the faint tremor of movement inside her, as though the cloth-stuffed body is not quite still. Some swear they have seen her glass eyes glisten with tears that never fall. Others speak of dreams in which their lost sons appear, reaching for them, only to dissolve into the doll's cracked porcelain face. And so the story of Joliet persists, not in books or films but in whispers and bloodlines. She is both legend and lived reality, a story told not to frighten children but to prepare daughters. She is not folklore for strangers but a private scripture of grief. Yet stories have a way of escaping, and now Joliet's tale has found its way into the wider world. Paranormal researchers debate whether she is truly cursed, a vessel of spirits, or merely a symbol of tragic coincidence. But for those who carry her, no debate is needed. The curse is real, the cries are real, the loss is real, and Joliet endures. Waiting in the quiet corners of night, her body a reliquary of sorrow, her eyes a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying ghosts are not strangers but our own children, our own blood, forever bound to a porcelain shell. Nightfall has a way of stripping away illusions. In the brightness of day, even the most cursed objects seem dull and harmless. But when the sun sinks and shadows lengthen across the room, the stillness of things begins to throb with unease. It is in such hours that Joliet reveals herself most clearly, for she does not haunt in the open, nor does she perform for strangers. Her realm is the midnight silence, the fragile hours when grief awakens like a phantom sitting at the edge of the bed. The women who have kept her daughters, widows of sorrow, speak of the transformation that occurs after dusk. By day, Joliet is a relic, tucked into a wooden chest or resting in a faded cradle. But at night, her presence swells. The air thickens around her. A subtle vibration fills the house, not loud enough to disturb, but present, like a low hum pressing against the bones of the walls. And then come the voices, at first faint, like distant echoes carried on wind through a broken window. A whimper, a sigh, then sharper, an infant's cry, high-pitched, fragile, aching with hunger. Sometimes it grows into laughter, not joyous but eerie, like a child playing in the dark with no one to play with. The mothers say it is unmistakable. These are their sons, the ones who lived only days, whose deaths felt like wounds torn open by invisible claws. The voices rise, converge, overlap, until the house feels crowded by the unborn, the unfinished, the incomplete. Each generation adds another layer to the chorus, so that Joliet no longer carries one ghost, but many. In the family's oral tradition, there is a chilling phrase whispered among the women, la canción de los muertos, the song of the dead. This is what they call Joliet's nightly cries, a lullaby that is not sung by mothers to children but by children to mothers. Some say it is a lament, others that it is a mocking tune, but all agree it is a sound that gnaws at the soul. One woman, in a rare interview, described how the voices often come in waves, beginning as a single infant wail, then spreading into a harmony of cries, until suddenly all sound ceases, replaced by a whisper, too faint to decipher. She claimed that in those whispers she sometimes hears her own name, as if her lost son is calling to her, begging to be held again. What mother could resist such a call? Yet, what mother could endure it without breaking? The voices are not Joliet's only trick. The women describe shadows moving where no shadows should be. They speak of fleeting figures, childlike forms darting across doorways, reflections of small hands pressed against mirrors, though no children live in the house. Some claim to have awoken at night to find a pressure against their chest, as if a small body were lying across them, its breath warm but unseen. In some accounts, Joliet herself shifts position, not violently, not like the spinning heads of horror films, but subtly, like a person turning in restless sleep, a head tilted differently than before, a hand that seems to have shifted closer to the cradle, eyes that glisten with a wetness that should not be possible in porcelain. A granddaughter of the family once told of waking in the middle of the night to find Joliet at the foot of her bed. She had been left in the living room, wrapped in cloth, but there she was, perched upright, her cracked face turned toward the girl. The family does not speak of how Joliet moved, only that she was returned to her place, and the story buried under silence. Among Mexico's spiritual traditions, such hauntings are rarely dismissed as accidents. The doll is seen as a vasilla container, a house for spirits. In Catholicism, one might view it as demonic possession, a tool of the devil masquerading as innocent flesh. In indigenous traditions, however, Joliet could be understood as a binding object, something into which souls are trapped, unable to ascend because grief anchors them to the world. Some Brujist folk, witches, claim that Joliet is not merely cursed, but deliberately created as a reliquary, a soul jar, a prison for infant spirits. Each death feeds the doll, strengthening its hold on the family, ensuring its survival across generations. Others suggest that Joliet is not the boys at all, but something older, darker, a spirit that delights in suffering, mimicking the cries of children to tighten its bond with the family. Like a parasite, it thrives on sorrow, consuming grief like nectar. Whichever interpretation one accepts, the conclusion is the same. Joliet is not just an object, she is a presence, a being, a thing that lives by inhabiting absence. As Joliet's legend leaked beyond the family, paranormal researchers begged for access. Some were refused outright. Others, after years of negotiation, were allowed brief visits. They described the atmosphere of the home as oppressive, the doll radiating a field of unease. One investigator swore that upon lifting Joliet, he felt her pulse, faint but steady, as though she had a heartbeat of her own. Another reported capturing audio of a faint cry, though skeptics dismissed it as interference. No recordings, however, can match the testimony of the women themselves. They do not speak with theatrical exaggeration. They speak with the quiet resignation of those who live inside a storm they cannot escape. They do not ask for proof. They do not need it. For them, Joliet is not an experiment but a daily reality, a shadow braided into their lineage. Perhaps most terrifying are the dreams. Every woman who has inherited Joliet speaks of them. They begin subtly, visions of children running through fields, faceless yet familiar. Then they grow darker, dreams of cradles filled with black water, dreams of infants crying from inside walls, dreams of Joliet herself standing at the doorway, her porcelain lips parting, not to cry but to whisper words in a language no living person understands. Some say the dreams bleed into waking life. They report seeing their lost sons at the edge of the bed, not as infants but as older children, boys who might have been 7 or 12 or grown men. These figures reach out, eyes hollow, mouths moving silently, before fading back into Joliet's hollow shell. It is as if the doll not only holds the souls, but shapes them into what they might have become, mocking the mothers with visions of futures that will never be. Asterisk. One might ask why the family does not rid themselves of Joliet. Why not burn her, bury her, throw her into the sea? The answer is layered. Partly, it is fear that destroying Joliet would release whatever force inhabits her, turning it loose in vengeance. Partly, it is love because, despite the curse, the doll carries the voices of the sons they can never hold again. To destroy Joliet would be to silence them forever. But beneath fear and love lies something else, inevitability. The women speak of Joliet as if she is not an object but a law, a natural force, like gravity or death. She is not something they have, she is something they are. To inherit Joliet is to inherit the truth that grief is unbreakable. That sorrow is not an accident but a pattern, carved into their blood. Over the decades, the family has noticed that Joliet's influence seems to deepen. In the earliest stories, she carried only one voice, the cry of the lost twin, but now she holds many. Each generation adds to her chorus until the house vibrates with the nursery of the dead. Some claim her powers have grown too, that she can now influence moods, sowing despair, or cloud the air with dread, so thick it makes breathing difficult. There are whispers that she has begun to mark those outside the bloodline as well. A cousin who visited the house reportedly left in terror after waking to hear a baby crying inside his suitcase. A neighbor claimed she saw a child's reflection in her mirror. Though she lived alone, it is as if Joliet is no longer content with her family, as if her hunger is beginning to spread. Asterisk to outsiders, Joliet is a ghost story, but to the women who live with her, she is a mirror. She reflects their deepest truth, that grief is never finished, that the past does not die but echoes, that children can be lost again and again until sorrow itself becomes the family heirloom. In this sense, Joliet is more than haunted. She is symbolic, mythic, archetypal. She is the embodiment of generational trauma, the way wounds ripple through bloodlines like cracks spreading through glass. She is the voice of the lost, yes, but also the silence of the living, who cannot speak of their pain without summoning her. And so the haunting builds, layer upon layer, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Joliet grows heavier with each generation, her chorus louder, her presence darker. The family grows more weary, more fractured, more resigned, and those who hear of her beyond the family grow more fascinated, more fearful, more convinced that this is not simply a legend but a curse alive in the modern world. The doll waits, silent in daylight, loud in darkness. She waits for the next birth, the next death, the next voice to join her chorus. She waits because curses are patient. She waits because grief never ends. And as night deepens, her eyes, dull glass, cracked and glistening, seem almost to flicker, as if something inside her is trying to look out. The haunting has only begun. The storm that had been building around Isabella, her family, and the cursed doll did not arrive with the thunder of skies or the crash of lightning. It came silently, like the suffocating stillness before an earthquake, when every sound in the world seems to die and the air itself becomes a listening ear. That silence descended upon the Flores household after the third night of Joliet's cries. The crying had grown stranger, no longer the fragile, wailing sobs of a baby. Now, Isabella thought, the doll cried with two voices, one soft and infant-like, the other lower, hoarse, almost guttural, as though some older thing had slipped into the sound. When the cries rippled through the walls, her husband shivered in his sleep and muttered incoherent words. Her daughter Alma began to dream of drowning, gasping and kicking in her sleep as though water filled her lungs, and Isabella herself she no longer dreamed at all. Instead, she would lie awake, staring at Joliet's painted face, unable to look away. Sometimes the porcelain seemed to flicker, as if shadows beneath the surface of the doll's skin were shifting. Its glassy eyes shimmered in the half-light, and though Isabella told herself this was imagination, a trick of sleeplessness, she could not shake the certainty that the doll was beginning to see her. The escalation began in subtle gestures. The blanket covering Joliet would be found crumpled in a corner of the room, though no one had touched it. The rocking chair where the doll had been placed began to creak gently on its own, swaying back and forth as though rocked by invisible hands. Once, in the early hours before dawn, Alma came running into her mother's room, pale and trembling. "She held my hand," Alma whispered. Her voice trembled with both fear and innocence. "The baby, she held my hand, Mama. She wanted me to go with her." Isabella clasped her daughter against her chest, stroking her hair. "It's only a dream." "Maybe," she whispered, but her heart thudded with denial. Alma's hand was ice cold. From that night forward, the family's perception of Joliet shifted. It was no longer just an heirloom, no longer even a cursed relic of family tragedy. It had become a presence, something alive, and not merely with the breath of an infant spirit. It moved within the very air of the house, saturating their days, bending their nights. The priest arrived on the fourth night. Father Ignacio was old and half-blind, but his faith was unyielding, his rosary polished smooth by decades of trembling prayers. He came at Isabella's request, clutching his worn Bible, muttering blessings before his feet had even crossed the threshold. He asked to see the doll. When Joliet was placed before him on the dining table, Father Ignacio lowered himself into the chair opposite it, his lips forming prayers in Latin. He made the sign of the cross, and the flame of the nearby candle fluttered wildly, bending sideways as if a sudden gust of wind had invaded the room. "Do you feel that?" he asked quietly. Isabella nodded. She felt it in her bones, a tremor not of the earth but of the soul. The priest raised his hand, rosary clutched between his fingers. "If there is a child's soul bound here, may the mercy of God release it," he intoned. His voice quavered but did not falter. For a long moment, silence reigned. Then the doll's glassy eyes seemed to glisten, as though wet, and from its painted lips came a sound that was not a cry, but a laugh, a child's laugh, soft, fragile, echoing. The room froze. Alma clutched her mother's skirt. Isabella's husband muttered a curse under his breath. Father Ignacio pressed his palm flat to the table, rosary swinging from his wrist. "Who are you?" he demanded, voice trembling but firm. The laughter faded, replaced by a whisper faint, but unmistakable. "I am yours." The words did not come from the priest, nor from Isabella, nor from any throat that should have been capable of speaking. They came from the air itself, as though the house had borrowed a voice. The whisper slithered into the ears of all present, sinking like cold water into their spines. Father Ignacio's lips moved faster, Latin prayers flooding out like a dam bursting. "Domini, libera nos amalo," but the doll shuddered, not rocked, not shifted, shuddered, as though something inside it pressed against its porcelain shell. The table rattled beneath it. The flame of the candle burst upward, stretching unnaturally tall before extinguishing completely. Darkness enveloped the room. In that pitch-black silence, Joliet began to wail. Not a single cry, not even two layered cries, but a chorus. Dozens of children, crying in anguish, their voices overlapping into a cacophony of torment. Some high-pitched, some raspy, some gasping for air as though suffocated. The cries swelled, echoed through the walls, rebounded in their skulls. Alma screamed and clung to her mother's neck. Isabella's husband fell to his knees, clutching his ears. Father Ignacio's prayers faltered. His voice cracked under the weight of the sound, and then through the chaos a single voice cut clear. A child's voice, but sharp, commanding, cruel. "We are not leaving." The words struck like a blade. Isabella could not breathe. She could not even hold her daughter tightly enough to shield her from the sound. She stared at the doll through the shadows, those glass eyes gleaming faintly, lit from within by some unnatural glow. The priest staggered back, one hand clutched to his chest, rosary dangling uselessly from his fingers. His breath came in ragged gasps. "It is not one child," he whispered hoarsely. "It is many, bound together. A prison of spirits. Dios mío." What followed blurred into nights of terror. Father Ignacio returned twice more, bringing holy water and fellow clergy, but the rituals failed. Each attempt only agitated the doll further. Once, the crucifix cracked in half, as though twisted by unseen hands. Another time, the scent of burning filled the room, though no flame existed. The doll's cries seeped beyond the house, into the street. Neighbors whispered of hearing an infant wail through the night, though no baby lived on their block. Some claimed to see small shadows moving at their windows, pressing against the glass before vanishing. And Alma Sweet, she spoke to invisible companions, laughed when no one else laughed, paused in silence as though listening to voices others could not hear. Her drawings filled with children holding hands, children with empty eyes, children floating above the ground. Isabella begged her daughter not to speak to them. Alma would smile sadly and say, "But Mama, they're lonely. They just want to play." The house grew colder. The nights grew longer. The family's prayers felt like whispers against a storm. Then came the seventh night. Isabella awoke to silence, not the heavy, suffocating silence of before, but a brittle silence, like glass about to shatter. She rose, heart pounding, and walked down the hall. Her husband stirred behind her but did not rise. Alma's room glowed faintly beneath the door. Though no lamp was lit, she pushed the door open. And froze. Alma stood in the center of the room, hands clasped as though in prayer. Before her, Joliet sat upright on the bed without support. Around them shimmered faint shapes, figures, small and translucent, like pale children outlined in mist. Their heads tilted in unison as Isabella entered, eyes hollow, mouths open in faint sobs. "Mama," Alma said softly, her voice eerily calm. "They say it's time." The shapes turned their hollow faces toward Isabella. The room pressed inward, air heavy with the scent of earth and damp cloth. The doll's mouth parted, and for the first time, Isabella swore she saw its lips move. One more. This then was the climax, the unraveling of sanity, the confrontation between flesh and spirit, the line between life and death blurring until no distinction could be drawn. Isabella's scream never left her throat, trapped in the crushing silence that followed. The storm of souls had reached its breaking point, and Joliet the doll, the vessel, the cursed child, was no longer content to remain a relic. It was becoming a door. The house itself seemed to exhale as Isabella staggered forward into her daughter's room. That exhalation was not relief, nor warning, but an acknowledgement, a sigh of something old, a breath from beyond. The shimmering shapes of children clung to the air like smoke, their forms unstable, bending in and out of vision. They huddled around Joliet, as if orbiting her like moths around a lantern of the damned. Alma's small hands trembled, though she remained unnaturally calm, as if she had surrendered to the voices long ago. "Mama," she whispered again, "they need me." The words were like knives in Isabella's ears. She wanted to shout, to snatch Alma away, to smash the porcelain doll against the wall until it was shards and dust. But her body refused, her muscles seizing in the icy grip of fear. Each time she tried to step forward, the children-shaped phantoms tilted their heads and let out a hisser sound of wet lungs, of gurgled crisri, minding her of drowned infants in riverbeds. "Alma," Isabella forced her voice through trembling lips. "Stay away from them. Do you hear me? Stay away." Her daughter turned, and for a flicker of a second, Isabella saw not Alma's warm brown eyes, but two hollow, glassy orbs reflecting candlelight that wasn't there. Then Alma blinked, and the girl's own gaze returned. She looked scared, confused, yet still enthralled by the voices only she could fully hear. The doll spoke again, not laughter this time, not a whisper, but words, its porcelain mouth cracked with emotion, faint splinters breaking at the corners. "One must stay." The children's shadows echoed the command in their broken chorus. "One must stay, one must stay." Their chant grew louder until the walls vibrated, until the crucifix above Alma's bed rattled and split down its center with a sharp crack. Father Ignacio had once warned Isabella, "This is no single haunting. This is a covenant of grief. You cannot unmake it without paying its toll." Now, she understood. The doll was not simply cursed, it was hungry. Each generation, it had demanded a bond, an exchange, a child, to tether to its chorus of sorrow. The family had always feared this moment, whispering about it, but never admitting its full truth. Now, Isabella stood in the threshold of that inheritance, her mind fractured in terror and fury. She lunged forward, grabbing Alma and pulling her into her arms. The misty children shrieked, a sound so piercing it rattled the windows and fractured the light bulb above. Joliet's body trembled violently on the bed, as though an earthquake pulsed through its small porcelain shell. "No!" Isabella screamed. "You cannot have her." The shadows surged, but Isabella clutched her daughter tighter, pressing her face into her chest. She ran from the room, stumbling through the hallway as the air thickened, resisting her like water. Alma clung to her, crying now, the trance broken. Behind them, Joliet's voice roared, no longer a child's, but something vast, ancient, jagged. "You cannot break the chain." The house shuddered as though its foundations had been struck. Pictures fell from the walls, glass shattering across the floor. The kitchen window exploded outward with a violent gust. Isabella and Alma reached the front door, but when Isabella twisted the knob, it would not turn. The door seemed fused to the frame. The whispers closed in. Hands small, icy, spectral grasped at her arms, her hair, her daughter's legs. Alma shrieked, writhing in terror. Isabella fought, kicking and slamming her shoulder against the wood. "One must stay," the voices repeated. Then Isabella's husband appeared, stumbling from the shadows, pale and trembling, rosary clenched in his fist. With a wordless cry, he raised it high and smashed it against the doorframe. The wood split, the rosary snapped, and the door burst open in a blinding flash of white light. The family tumbled into the street, choking on air, gasping as though released from drowning. Behind them, the house fell silent, dead silent. The dolls' cries had ceased. For days afterward, the Flores family stayed with relatives. The house remained untouched, avoided like a plague. When neighbors passed by, they swore they heard faint giggles, faint sobbing through the cracked windows. No one dared step inside. Father Ignacio returned one last time, his hands trembling with weakness, his eyes shadowed by exhaustion. He stood at the gate and would go no further. "The chain is not broken," he told Isabella quietly. "You may have escaped it for now, but Joliet waits. Always, she waits. If not for your daughter, then for her daughter, or hers after that." He turned his gaze upon Isabella, his lips tight. "You can move, you can burn the house, you can bury the doll. It will not matter. The curse is not in the walls, nor in the porcelain. It is in the blood." The words fell like stones into Isabella's soul. Years blurred. Isabella moved her family far from that neighborhood, far from the whispers. She locked Joliet in an iron chest and buried it deep in her grandmother's land, pouring salt and holy water over the soil. She told herself it was enough, that she had severed the connection, that Alma was safe. But children have their own truth start at night. Alma sometimes whispered in her sleep, holding invisible hands. She grew quiet, withdrawn. At school, her drawings remained the same. Lines of children standing in rows, always with one space left empty. One evening, Isabella overheard her daughter humming. The tune was unfamiliar, eerie, lilting, like a lullaby from nowhere. "Who taught you that?" Isabella asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Alma looked up with eyes too old for her years. "The baby," she said softly. "She says she misses her mama." Isabella's blood ran cold. The ending was never truly an ending, only an opening into dread. The doll remained buried, silent but restless. The whispers carried through bloodlines, from mother to daughter, like a poison disguised as inheritance. The curse was not bound to Joliet. Alone it was Joliet. Some nights, in the silence of her new home, Isabella would jolt awake. In the distance faint, almost imperceptibly she would hear it again, the cry of a child. Sometimes it was Alma's, sometimes it was many, and once, just once, it was her own voice as a child, crying to a mother long buried, asking why she had been left behind. The sound filled her chest with despair, with the terrible certainty that she was not only fleeing the curse, she was carrying it within her. And somewhere, beneath the soil of her grandmother's land, the doll's cracked porcelain smile endured, waiting, watching, counting the years until the next generation's toll would come due. The last words Isabella ever heard from its whispers were not curses, not cries, but a promise. "We are never alone, neither are you." The story lingers not with the scream of terror, but with the whisper of inevitability. Joliet does not end. She waits. She becomes not only Mexico's cursed child spirit, but the echo of grief itself. A shadow that clings to mothers, daughters, and the fragile silence between lullabies. The chain remains. The door is open. The voices are never far.